This season on DNA ID, a couple shot at a campground, a realtor waylaid at a home showing, a bookstore owner stabbed among her volumes, a young soldier dumped in a parking lot. What do all these tragic cases have in common? They are all cold cases solved after decades of frustration and futility by forensic genealogy. I'm Jess Betancourt, and in Season 2 of DNA ID, I'll bring you 24 more fascinating cases in which the killer eluded generations of investigators until science and some crafty genealogists cracked them at long last. Listen to DNA ID on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes drop every other Monday.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel here. My name is Carter-Landin. I'm the host and producer of True Consequences podcast. And the co-ghost of Dos Pequeños. I created this show to True Consequences. It was a love letter to my baby brother who was murdered 35 years ago. And I created the show to advocate for his case and to help other people in my community who are seeking justice. I live in New Mexico. My show is all about New Mexico. Really focused on advocacy and just trying to make an impact. And we're here today to talk to you about bringing the victims into focus in true crime. If any of you follow me on social media, you probably have seen some of my Twitter rants about ethics and true crime and what it's like being a family member in this space. And so today I'm joined by two other amazing family members who are seeking justice and answers in their families' cases, or standing up for what ethics are in true crime as well. So I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Julie. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, about your sister, and I don't know why I'm getting feedback here.
Yes, well, thank you all for joining. I think this is a much needed, well overdue conversation that we need to have. Thank you, Eric and Mariah, for joining me up here on this panel today. My name is Julie Murray. My little sister, Maura, was a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts, and she vanished, and we've had no answers, and it's been 18 years. So a little backstory on that. On February 9th of 2004, my sister, in the wee hours of the morning, turned in her nursing school homework. Later that day, she emailed her professors and said there was a death in the family. There was no death. She then picked up accident forms from the Massachusetts DMV because she had an accident where she totaled my dad's car 2 nights prior. Then she went to an ATM and withdrew $280. That pretty much was all that she had in the bank. Then she went to a liquor store and she purchased approximately $40 worth of liquor. Then she checked her voicemail at 4:37, and that was the last known activity on her cell phone. A couple hours later at 7:30 p.m., in a very remote area of New Hampshire, approximately 2.5 hours north of where she was at school at the University of Massachusetts, a neighbor looks out the window and sees a vehicle off the road in the lane going eastbound, but the car was facing the wrong direction. That person called 911, and she was in her kitchen. She was looking out at the scene. She turned around. She turned back. She noticed a bus approach the vehicle. There was a bus driver, his name was Butch Atwood. He spoke to the driver of the vehicle, asked if she needed help. The driver, who we have to assume was my sister Maura, said no, she had called AAA, but he knew that was a lie because there was no cell phone service in that area. 17 minutes later, when the first officer arrived, he came up to a locked and abandoned vehicle, and Mara was nowhere to be found. And there has been no credible sightings, no bank activity, no cell phone activity in 18 years.
Thank you, Julie. Mariah Day is here as well. Mariah, can you share a little bit about your mom and the case a little bit?
Yeah. So my name is Mariah Day, if you don't know who I am. My mom is Betsy Faria. She was brutally murdered in her home in December 27, 2011. Her husband, who was the only man I called dad and raised me from 3 to 17, was wrongfully convicted. She left behind 2 daughters, myself. I was 17 years old at the time of her death, and my older sister who's here today to show her support. So we went through 2 murder trials for his wrongful conviction. He got acquitted in 2015. The investigation was very poor. It's like they looked at the crime scene one time and decided who their suspect was without canceling out any other suspects. One of those being Pam Hupp, who financially gained $150,000 life insurance 4 days prior to her murder. My mom sent it over to her. So they neglected to look at her as a suspect, leaving her to kill again in 2016, trying to set up for us for the second time. It was in a different county, first of all, and they picked up on it pretty quickly. So she is in life for Louis Guppenberger, who she lured into her home and shot him, and he left behind 2 children as well. So she just got charged for my mom's murder in 2021. So we are awaiting trial for justice for my mom. She is in life in prison, but, and then NBC Dateline has covered the story since 2014. So then they decided to do a mini-series kind of mocking the entire situation. And here we are today.
So that is a perfect segue into the next conversation that we're going to have, and I'll start with you, Julie. What's it like being a family member that is kind of thrust into the spotlight of true crime? What's the good and what's the bad of that?
Yeah, well, I think the best way to answer this question is to kind of take you all on a journey. Imagine you have a loved one go missing, and then you go years without having any answers. Imagine what that must feel like, that unresolved trauma that just weighs heavily on you, and you never can shake it. It stays with you, it becomes a part of you. Now imagine somebody with maybe not the best coping skills. Imagine their mental health going through that. Imagine someone that may not have access or seek the services that they need to get through that very difficult time. And perhaps they turn to drugs and alcohol as their coping mechanism, right? So now imagine that while you're living that quiet desperation, which has become your life, and you're alone, normally you isolate, and someone shines a spotlight into your window, right? Now imagine your struggles, your shame, your embarrassment of how you're trying to cope with this privately is posted online. Imagine what that does to a person already struggling with something that you can't even put into words. It just sends you into a deep abyss that you may never recover from. And I can tell you from experience that has happened. That happened to my late sister, Kathleen. Her struggles with alcohol were posted online. She's embarrassed. She's ashamed. It was done so without compassion. It was done so without consent. And it was done so without context. That's what it feels like sometimes to be in this condition. And I wish it unknown.
Thank you. You want to add to that, Mariah?
I mean, yeah, these are people who have seen the worst side of people, and yet we're constantly being exploited for other people's gain and profit. So.
Yeah, I think it's really important for consumers of true crime content and listeners of true crime content to remember this is the worst day in all of our lives. You're talking about the absolute worst case scenario. And that needs to be treated with respect. Mm-hmm. You know? And so I, as a family member, I don't see anything wrong with people being interested in abnormal psychology, in the macabre. Yeah, that's some of how I cope with my trauma as well. But it's really important to remember that this isn't a movie. It's not a TV show, and it's not fiction. There are real people whose lives are impacted on a daily basis by the actions of others. And oftentimes, what's missing is the humanization of the victims and the families. I gotta get my phone because I didn't remember or memorize any of this. So I'll let either both of you or either of you take this one. There seems to be an increasing call on social media for true crime to change. Julie, you've done some videos. I think, Mariah, you've done some videos on social media as well, talking about this topic. Can you talk about the changes that you would like to see in true crime?
For me, I would like to see more light on the victims, show them as real people instead of showing the murderers, the killers. We tend to glorify them kind of in a way. And in their minds, any publicity is good publicity because they're narcissists and they like to be talked about. So you're just giving them what they want. So yeah, I mean, I want people to view the victims as real people and be able to put yourselves in our shoes and have more empathy, and there should be a lot of respect when it comes to creating true crime content. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. So my motto is engage with empathy. And what I mean by that is, Eric is wearing his empathy shirt.
Just for this camera.
When I say that, it's exactly what Mariah described. It's put yourself in our position or the victim's position in their shoes, and just imagine if it were your brother, sister, loved one, mother, how would you like their case to be covered? But I think it's important to note that I don't think any of us are saying we want to censor what's being put out there. That is not what we want to do. We don't want to control what's being put out there. We want to have some sort of standards put in place so that things that I described in my little journey don't happen. Because like Mariah said, we're living, breathing humans left behind in the wakes of these tragedies. And we are struggling sometimes, and we need that help. And I think if you're engaging with content with empathy, you're going to be part of the solution and help us, and also victims.
Yeah. I think that one thing that listeners can do to help family members is to not be passive with your true crime consumption. What can you do to help, even if it's just a share? It goes such a long way. My brother's story never made headlines until I started talking about it in adulthood. And he was never in the newspaper. He was never in the media. And I think that's probably better for me because I got to grow up without having that spotlight, and I was able to choose when to do that. So I think that that's an important thing. And for me, I think that the bare minimum should be fact-based, non-speculative, non-sensationalized, and empathetic. I mean, that's the highlights for me of what I would love to see true crime become, because I think that it can be used as a vehicle for good, and it can do some amazing things. My brother's case was reopened after 35 years because of the pressure that we put on the elected officials in New Mexico. So it can be used for good, and it can be used for bad. And I would love if more people would vote with their listens about who deserves to be heard.
Yeah, if you're listening to something and it sounds gross and icky, turn it off. Like, quit giving them your views, because that's what they want.
So here's another one for either of you, honestly. So sometimes media exposure is the only thing that will help a missing or unsolved case get resolved. This is kind of similar, right? But what are some of the positives of that, and what are some of the negatives that you've experienced?
I could take this one. So my sister Mara, she disappeared the same week that Facebook launched in 2004. So social media was in its infancy. And that was a good thing initially, because we had widespread coverage, use of this powerful, powerful tool called the internet. We could reach people all over the world instantly. And, at the beginning that was good, because instead of boots on the ground, knocking on doors, hanging up flyers, we just do a Facebook post and reach Texas, anywhere, But over time, social media has kind of turned ugly. And I think we can all agree to that. And it's given people the ability to anonymously troll, to spread misinformation. In my sister's case, misinformation is proliferated all over the place, and I talk about it all the time. 60% of what you read about Mara online is not true. It's just repeated over and over and over and over, because the internet, this powerful tool, cannot be contained, and it cannot be deleted. Yes, you can stealth delete something that you put out there, but you can't fully delete it. You can't delete it from the impact on my mind and how it affects my mental health. That's for sure.
Social media definitely gives everyone the right to voice their opinion. So when everyone's voicing their opinion on some of the worst days of your life, and you don't really have to read it, but you're curious, so you do kind of read it, and it definitely affects your mental health, and it sticks with you.
I think one of the first comments on YouTube that shook me and still stays with me to this day was somebody said, he's just trying to get rich off of his stupid dead brother. Oof. Yeah. It still bothers me, obviously.
What's funny though is like everyone else can talk about it, but when the victims talk about it, it's like we want to profit up.
Yeah.
But everyone else can profit up. Not like we're trying to profit up of it, but it just, why does that kill people's mind?
It's interesting to see that kind of keyboard warrior thing.
I think it makes people uncomfortable when we talk about it, because then they have to view us as real people.
Exactly. So let me see if I can find what I was going to look for here. Oftentimes, victims in true crime can be painted as villains by people in the media, people in true crime. There can be a lot of times where society and the media really expects victims to be perfect, right? So either of you, can you talk about the fallacy of the perfect victim and how it drives narratives in true crime?
Yeah, what is perfect? What is perfectionism? People say I'm a perfectionist. Well, what does that mean? What are you perfect at? And I get blank stares whenever I ask that question. And that's the thing. It's true in this situation as well. And sometimes not even on purpose. My sister Mara, somehow this narrative that she was this all-American girl came out, and it wasn't from the family. It was somebody else said, oh, look at this all-American girl. Well, she did this wrong, she did this wrong, she did this wrong. And they create this narrative and then tear it down themselves, when my family never said Mara was flawless. But back to your point, people in our situations, families are desperate. And people prey on that. And, we make mistakes. We don't have guidebooks. We don't know what we're doing half the time. we're just doing our best, and we're vilified for it sometimes.
I mean, my sister and I have gotten so much hate from looking at the justice system and putting our faith in the justice system. Everyone thinks, oh, we betrayed so-and-so. We literally put our faith in the justice system. We had no idea what we were doing. We were 17 and 21. We're not detectives. It's not our job. We just want justice for our mom. So.
Yeah. I think this kind of goes back to the humanization part that we're missing in a lot of true crime. It doesn't matter if somebody had addiction issues. It doesn't matter if they were sex workers. None of that matters. What matters is that we're left here with this huge hole in our lives. And I think every victim deserves justice. They don't have to live a perfect life to be deserving of that. They don't have to live a perfect life to be deserving of respect. It's just the bare minimum, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's go over here. Okay, so I think I'm gonna bring this to you, and then you can jump in if you want. So recently I've seen several family members that have petitioned streaming giants like Hulu and Netflix to not cover their family's cases. And often, almost always, these calls and petitions are ignored. Can you share your thoughts on this kind of non-consensual trauma porn?
Well, they don't really ask you for permission. They just come to you and say, we're doing this. Would you like an interview? And so, I didn't want them to make it without my voice being heard in the matter. So I did the interview. And it's not like I don't want it made. I would like awareness to be brought for wrongful convictions. But portrayal is everything. There's so many people who have seen the satire show, and it's like I had to immediately turn it off because it was so disrespectful. People who don't even know me or the whole situation, they're just like, this is real people's lives, and they're trying to make it in a comedic tone. So yeah, I think portrayal is everything when it comes to that kind of stuff. The big networks is what is doing that. So, what was the question?
Well, how do you feel about them doing that without consent from the family, and also the way that they portray it?
It's definitely disgusting.
Yeah.
And I think there's a better way that they can bring light to the cases and bring awareness. And there should be, like I said, a fine line of respect. Like they could have made everything up when they made that.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just add on, it's important to ask who has the most at stake and what is the cost. So who has the most at stake in your situation? It's your family, and sometimes shows like that, they'll sideline ethics for dramatic effect. And they do it, and they've done it in my sister's case numerous times. And we need to shift that focus back to who are we hurting in this process? And are we entertaining people with the worst day of our lives? And as consumers, are you entertained by it, or are you doing something to further the case? Are you watching this so that you can learn something to further the case? If this is how you get awareness for cases and you're going to use it for good, I'm all for it. But a lot of times it's just a passive, I'm just going to eat my popcorn and look at this horrible tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? It's not just about consent, it's also about how we're approaching this whole thing. So, victim blaming is a common theme in true crime. This kind of goes back to the perfect victim. But why is victim blaming harmful to cases and families? Either of you. I have thoughts on it too, so I can go first if you want me to. Victim blaming is a really weird phenomenon that I don't quite understand. When you hear people saying things like, well, she shouldn't have been out there that late, or maybe she shouldn't have been drinking and then that wouldn't have happened to her, or maybe in my case, my mom should have left her boyfriend and then my brother would still be alive. None of that is helpful in any capacity. It's fine that you have your, forgive my language, shitty opinion, but really nobody needs to hear it, right? Because it does nothing to solve cases. It does nothing to lift people up. All it does is hurt the people who are already devastated, who are already gutted. And when I see things like that, it makes my blood boil. It makes me really angry because nobody asks for this to happen to them. And I think that's an important thing to talk about.
Yeah, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
I think there's this tactic where people dehumanize a victim or a family member, and in the dehumanization of them, they're able to rationalize how they're going to exploit them. And they're going to exploit them, and they're going to make that person seem less than. And therefore, in some twisted way, not worthy of coverage, or not worthy of pouring resources in, or talking about. And it certainly has been that for my sister. I mean, she's been called a sociopath, armchair diagnosed as sociopath based on nothing, been called promiscuous. She was drunk driving, although she wasn't even at the scene, so how would we know? It's just things like that really need to change.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to add? Yeah? Okay. So it's pretty popular now for people to say that they're victim focused. What does that mean to you, Mariah?
I think giving the victims a voice in the matter is definitely a step in the right direction. I know it's hard for victims to speak up, but as more victims start to speak up on awareness, I think it'll bring bravery to some victims and just shining the light on the victim, and instead of murderers, showing them as real people and their families as real people. Victim focused.
Any thoughts, Julie?
Of course I just love that we are defining this stuff. Like, you see hashtag engage with empathy, hashtag victim centered, hashtag this and that, but what does it actually mean? You know, and for me, it's the focus is on my missing sister, and she is the center of the conversation, not, as Jason said earlier, a footnote in our own story. And if we're focusing on people and circumstances on the periphery of whatever case we're talking about, then that's not victim-centered. And it seems easy enough, but I think it's important that we spend this time to define these things.
Yeah. I think it's really important because it's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to do it. And for any creators that may be feeling like, this is coming off as judgmental or any of that, like honestly, from my perspective, and I'm probably going to speak for us here, but I don't want to speak for you, but intent is like 95% of it, right? Nobody's going to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes on my show as well. But it's what we do when that comes to light. Do we adjust? Do we grow? Do we try to do better next time? I think that is more than we could hope for as family members.
Yeah, I think accountability is crucial, both on the creator, the consumer, the family member. You've got to step up and say, I said the wrong term, or I made a mistake. I've made so many mistakes. I've trusted the wrong people. I've said the wrong thing. But you've got to be willing to adapt, admit your mistakes, and grow. People say, well, you were okay with this type of coverage 5 years ago. Well, I'm not anymore because I've grown. And that's okay.
Yeah. Times change, things change. So it's important to keep that in mind. So we've got about 15 minutes left before we wrap up. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. I've got some more questions to ask. Go ahead.
This is maybe kind of a personal question. I'm currently waiting to try my father's case.
Yeah.
And when it first happened, I was overseas. So I was kind of distant from the media.
Sure.
But now that I'm back, so they're away from college, I just want to match up. We got to be something really aggressive from another part. Do you have any advice? Because I'm on the track. I was kind of pressed out there.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? And I had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice, like, as a family member going forward?
Sure. We'll go down the line here. Start with Mariah.
Trials are hard, so be prepared for that. I was very young during the trial, so it's probably the most traumatic years I've ever lived. It's hard for me to give advice for trials because I get PTSD from them still. I'm sorry you have to go through that. Just know that it's definitely going to be the darkest times you'll ever live, but you can get through it. And it's okay to leave the trial when things are too tough. Or not leave, but like walk out, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I don't have any trial experience, but what I would recommend is make sure to protect your energy and take care of yourself throughout that because, I imagine it's incredibly difficult.
I just want to encourage you to know that you're not alone. And honestly, I can speak for myself. You can talk to me anytime. You can email me, DM me, whatever. This is what I feel my calling is, if I were to believe in that, is to help people in this situation. And so you may feel like you're alone in this situation, but you're not, because there's people here who understand what it's like to go through that. I echo what they say, take care of yourself, because you can't be there if you're not taking care of yourself. And feel free to reach out. There's no guidebook on how to do this. We're all kind of just trying to figure it out as we go. And there's a bunch of different ways to approach these kinds of things. So I would lean on other family members who have experienced it to be there for you.
Support is everything.
It is. I mean, I just met Mariah this week, but I met Julie earlier this year, and just the connection to people in this community who know what it's like. It's great to be able to text or message Julie and say, oh my God, this is happening and I'm freaking out. It's good to have that because we get it. So, if you have a question, I would just ask if you could come up and use the mic so that everybody can hear your question. Or you yell it and then I'll repeat it. Yes. It's right over here, in the front. You don't have to write. We're good. Yeah, you can start a line if you have questions. Might make it faster.
Hello. So I know you guys touched on the victim blaming, and aside from hurt people, and they're just one reaction, and the whole media aspect dehumanizing, why do you think that's the go-to? I feel like that's the go-to, where people are just kind of dismissing it. What do you feel behind that?
I think it's hard to know the intentions and motivations of everybody, but my experience has been that people online have a propensity to act without thinking. A lot of them act out of emotion. So in my brother's case, it's a very horrible child abuse case. and it's really hard for some people to listen to. And I think a lot of what people want to do, and I'm not a psychologist, so if there are psychologists and I'm wrong, you can correct me, but I think that what human nature is to distance ourselves from these kinds of tragedies. And so a lot of ways that people do that is by shifting the focus, and maybe in a negative way. It's like when I get really annoyed at my son for the way he's behaving, but he's acting just like me, right? It's kind of like that. And so I think that there's an instinct to get away from that, because you don't want to believe that somebody sitting here could abuse a baby until he dies. Nobody wants to believe that that's possible. But it's way more common than anybody knows, and it's because people don't want to talk about it, because it's uncomfortable. People don't want to listen to it because it's uncomfortable. But we can't ignore this away. It's not going to get better if we close our eyes. Do you have other thoughts on it?
Yeah, we're definitely the uncomfortable side of true crime, but it's the part of true crime that people need to hear if they want to consume the content. Especially if you're creating the content, you need to focus on victims' families. And you wouldn't have your stories if we weren't here, or the victims, you know. And people, when they're scrolling, they look at it for a second and they're like, oh, I'm just going to make a mean comment or whatever is going on in their mind. But we live through it. Like, this is our daily, constant. Yeah.
Yeah, I call it clicks over morality. You know, it's I'm gonna put this salacious and sensationalized story out, and it's gonna get me all kinds of attention. And because that's easy. It's difficult to look any one of us in the eye face to face and us tell you what it's really like and take you to that dark place. That's uncomfortable. That doesn't feel good. You have to invest some of your own energy into that, and we take you there. And it's I guess people want the path of least resistance, and that's not looking us in the eye and asking us, how do you feel? And I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I did, but I don't want to.
That's fine.
I'll just get it out. Do you think that when we're disrespectful of victims, and especially I think about sex workers, transgender, homosexuals, on and on, and if we're disrespectful towards those victims, it gives law enforcement permission to be dismissive of those victims?
I can see that. I mean, I don't know much on those topics.
I think that it is a societal problem. I think that it has been for a long time. And I think that law enforcement, as members of this society, are simply doing what they've learned, right? It's just recently become pretty normal to refer to people in sex work as sex workers instead of streetwalker, or whatever the other derogatory terms. I do think that that is a reflection of the overall society as a whole. And it really depends on where you're at, right? If you're in a larger city, it may not be as big of a deal for a gay person to, you know, but we do see higher rates of murder in the trans community, especially in people of color in the trans community. And there is a lack of concern and a lack of care from society in general about that. You see that also in people of color, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, the women of Juarez. I mean, there are so many people that are just tossed aside and treated like they deserved what happened to them.
I can't say it better.
Yes.
easier to picture how like realistic content, let's say,
So the question is how to identify positive, impacting, empathetic true crime versus some of the more exploitative types of true crime. You either you want to go first?
My advice is to listen with empathy. Like I said before, put yourself, like think of it as you're listening to someone talk about your loved one, and if it feels gross, don't listen to it. I think that's
Yeah, I think it's a balance between the public's public interest and furthering the case. So in a lot of these situations we're dealing with vulnerable people, and you have to decide, am I going to put out this unflattering information about a victim or family member to further the case? If so, I think it's fine. But are you putting out unflattering information that has no journalistic purpose? So a rumor, speculation. And you've got to decide, and hopefully have a family member or an advocate to reach out to who can tell you, hey, this isn't furthering the case. But it is a difficult balance.
I think that a lot of people have asked, can you make a list of the ones that are doing it right? And honestly, I was talking to Sarah Turney a few days ago, and she made a really good point. She said that could be irrelevant within an hour, right? It's hard to know. But I think that some of the things that you want to look out for in a predatory or exploitive type of true crime is sensationalism. Are we taking a terrible tragedy and trying to make it worse so that we can get clicks? What is the motivation for that person? Are they giving back to families? Are they doing things to help spread awareness? Or are they just trying to make themselves give breaking news? Pay attention to how they're interacting with other people on social media. Oftentimes you'll see a creator who is doing things what I consider to be the wrong way, and when they get confronted, they become defensive and they start fighting with victims' families or with other people. Those are the kinds of things that, for me, are red flags, that this person is not focusing on the right thing. They're not focused on what's important, which is, number one, why are you telling the story? Are you telling the story just to tell the story? Or are you telling the story to help? There's a big difference. I have time for 2 more questions. I think I got 1 more, and then you're next. Yeah.
This question is for Ms. Julie. Since your sister went missing in 2004, you're saying that's the infancy of Facebook. Have you noticed a trend of people becoming more interested in your sister's case between 2004 and say 2011 compared to 2011 to now? Because the true crime community has seemed to blossom and grow over the last decade or so. I've been interested in true crime since I was little, and I was aware of your sister's case when it happened, but it seems like it's more, not in your face, that's a really negative way to look at it, but it seems like it's everywhere. Have you noticed an uptick of a trend in the last, say, decade compared to what it was in the beginning?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, absolutely. I think with all the different social media platforms, we're able to reach a larger audience. And we're getting new social media platforms all the time. And of course that is gonna keep spreading awareness. And for a family like mine, where we have a cold case, 18 years and no answers, we're in desperate need of that awareness, because I believe awareness is what solves cold cases. So I think somebody out there knows something. I think they know what may have happened to my sister, but they may not know that they know, or they may think what they know is so insignificant that they're never gonna raise it up. But if I keep putting it in their face day after day after day, and that's what we do up here, I'm hoping that one day I'm gonna reach that 1 or 2 people that may know something to solve the case. So yes, also with my sister's case, it's so mysterious that people latch onto it and they see themselves in Mara. And I think that's another reason why people become so attached, and sometimes that turns into a dark obsession, which is not good. But it's definitely increased. And my personal mission is to continue to do that until I find my sister.
You're just so inspiring, both of you. Like I'm so happy to be here with you. Do you want to ask your question?
So I'm directing this question to Julie, although if it come the whole panel would be great. You mentioned that over the years there has been a significant amount of misinformation distributed about your sister's story. It's a two-part question. So are you finding that when a podcast covers your story, that misinformation is being repeated? And what is the balance or suggestion from all of you as victims, the balance between a podcaster reaching out to the victim and the victim's family, and the importance of them getting those facts clean and not putting misinformation in? And how would you like to see that sort of interaction?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There's been so much misinformation on my sister's case that I can't even contain it, I can't control it. And when people start just taking subjective interpretations as indisputable fact, that's harmful. That's harmful for the investigation, and that's harmful to Mara, and that's harmful to my family. So what I encourage people to do is do your due diligence. Just because you heard it on a big podcast doesn't mean that it's true. Because a lot of times, people are busy and they repeat something because, so-and-so who's a big-time podcaster said it, it must be true. So the onus is on both the content creator and the consumer to do that fact-checking, check the veracity of the sourcing. So there's stuff about my sister that has been sourced, but the sourcing is hearsay. And the hearsay source is not credible. Or, I've seen stuff on Mara's Wikipedia page, and it's sourced from Reddit. And I have to report it and get it removed from Wikipedia because people think that what they see on Reddit by some anonymous troll is true. So,
and you're seeing that repeated by podcasters.
And I see it repeated by podcasters. Yeah. Well, just FYI, Mara's not in Canada writing emails. Okay? She's just not. So, people need to stop saying that until it can be proven. But for the podcast question, I think Eric might be.
Yeah. I think that checking the sources, if they're listing their sources, they should be. If they are, checking the sources, see what they are. Is it police records, police interviews? Is it verified information that has been vetted by a journalist? And those are the kinds of things that for me, if I don't see sources, that's an immediate red flag. Where are they getting their information? Are they just listening to other podcasts and then copying it? Probably. So I think, to your point, verify the veracity, look at the sources, and then make your own decision. Think critically about it.
Do you want podcast creators contacting you guys as the victim? Is that something?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would like, it's 2022 and you can find anyone on social media these days. At least like hey, I want to bring awareness to your mom's case. Like the amount of times I found a podcast did my mom's case from like an acquaintance just texting me, hey, I saw your case on Morbid. Like that's how I found out. And it's just like they can reach out to me and at least bring me aware and give me a chance to put my voice in the matter.
Yeah, I think it's important, especially, and we've got to wrap up because I think somebody else is going to be coming in here, but I think it's important, especially like in my case, we're not naming the suspect at all. Because in New Mexico, that would start the time clock on speedy trial. And so I would rather want to have that conversation with the creator before they release that information so that I'm not surprised by that. Because that could mess up the whole case. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. Thank you to Julie Murray and Mariah.